They stripped her of her title, her home, and her dignity, and mistook her silence for surrender. They believed that once Vivian Hayes signed the divorce papers without protest, she would fade back into the obscurity they were certain she had come from. Preston Hayes and his vicious mother were convinced they had buried her future with a pen stroke and a smug smile. What they did not understand was this: some women do not collapse when they are cornered. Some women disappear only long enough to return as a storm. And when Vivian stepped out of a black Gulfstream on the tarmac of the most exclusive gala of the year, draped in midnight blue velvet and looking nothing like the discarded wife they had mocked, everyone in that hangar understood the truth at once. She had not come back for forgiveness. She had come back to collect. The only sound in the grand mahogany library was the soft scratch of a fountain pen moving over paper. Beyond the tall windows, rain battered the glass with relentless force, as though the weather itself had come to witness the destruction taking place inside the Hayes estate. Vivian sat perfectly straight in a leather armchair, her shoulders square, her expression calm in a way that did not belong to a woman losing everything. Across from her, Preston Hayes lounged with the detached impatience of a man waiting for an inconvenient meeting to end. He checked his Patek Philippe as though his own divorce was a minor interruption in an otherwise successful day. Behind him stood his mother, Beatrice Hayes, draped in her pearls and superiority. Beatrice had the kind of presence that poisoned a room without raising her voice, though tonight she did both. "Just sign it, Vivian," she snapped. "There's no reason to drag this out. We all know you've been trying to figure out what you can get from my son, but the prenuptial agreement is airtight. You leave with what you brought in, which, if memory serves, was next to nothing." Vivian lifted her gaze at last. Her eyes were empty of tears. She had used those up 3 nights earlier when she walked into her bedroom and found Preston in their bed with Tiffany Sterling, the polished, blonde daughter of a rival pharmaceutical titan. Preston had not begged for forgiveness. He had not even looked ashamed. He had leaned back against the headboard with the exhausted expression of a man tired of being misunderstood, and told her that maybe it was time they both accepted the obvious. They were no longer compatible. "I don't want alimony," Vivian said quietly. Preston let out a laugh and finally lowered his watch arm. "Please, Viv, don't do the saint routine. My attorneys already warned me you might try to fight for the lake house. That's not happening. I don't want the lake house." He stared at her. "I don't want the apartment in Manhattan. I don't want the car. I don't want any of it." Her eyes dropped to the document on the desk. Decree of Dissolution of Marriage. It was clinical, sharp, and merciless. She was to vacate the property immediately. She was to stop using the Hayes name socially within 30 days. She was to accept a final settlement of $5,000, a number so deliberately insulting it might as well have been a slap. "Be sure to initial the bottom of page 4, said Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, without looking directly at her. He sounded ashamed to be in the room at all. Vivian took the pen, signed where she was told, and initialed the remaining pages with steady hands. No pause, no trembling, no final plea. When she finished, she closed the folder and slid it across the desk. "Done." Beatrice snatched the papers up as though afraid Vivian might change her mind. Her eyes skimmed every page, and when she found all the signatures in place, satisfaction spread across her face like venom warming in sunlight. "At last," she said. "Preston, I told you 5 years ago this would happen. Mixed status marriages never last. A woman can learn to wear silk, but that doesn't turn her into society." Preston rose and buttoned his jacket.
He regarded Vivian with a blend of relief and shallow pity. "This is the best thing for both of us. You were never comfortable in this world. You'll be happier back in yours." Vivian looked up slowly. "My world?" "You know what I mean," he said, waving a hand. "Smaller, simpler, quieter. No board dinners, no benefit galas, no expectations. I'll have the driver take you to the station." "No." The single word made everyone in the room pause. Vivian stood. She wore a simple beige trench coat over black slacks. To them, she looked plain, ordinary, replaceable. They had never understood how dangerous it was to dismiss someone who had spent years learning how to survive humiliation without flinching. "I called a cab," she said. "It's waiting at the gate." Beatrice barked out a laugh. "Of course it is! How appropriate. Just make sure none of the silver disappears on your way out." Vivian turned toward her. The look she gave Beatrice was so cold, so stripped of the submission the older woman had enjoyed for years, that Beatrice's smile flickered. "Goodbye, Beatrice," Vivian said softly. "I hope the price of your son's happiness was worth it." Then she picked up her suitcases and walked out. Her heels echoed across the marble foyer.
She did not look at the chandelier, the grand staircase, or the expensive artwork lining the walls. She did not look back at the life she had spent 5 years trying to earn. When the heavy front door closed behind her, the sound was final. The rain hit her face in hard, icy sheets. At the gate, the taxi idled with its headlights glowing through the storm. She slid into the back seat, drenched to the bone. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked. Vivian took a slow breath. Then she pulled a small burner phone from her pocket. Not the iPhone Preston had bought her, not anything tied to the Hayes name. This was something she had purchased the day before, something clean, something that belonged to no one but her. She dialed a number she had not touched in 6 years. The line rang once. "This is the Blackwood private line," a deep male voice answered. "Who is this?" Her throat tightened for the first time that night. "It's me, Grandpa." A beat of silence. Then, "Sienna?" Her breath broke on the name, her real name, the name she had buried beneath the identity of Vivian Hayes. "I'm done," she whispered. "I'm coming home." The voice on the other end changed instantly, hardening into fierce authority. "It's about damn time, Sienna. The jet is already in Teterboro. We've been waiting for you." 2 weeks later, Preston Hayes had convinced himself life was back on course. The divorce had been finalized with obscene speed, thanks to money, influence, and a court system that bent easily for the right last name. The house felt different without Vivian, but he told himself that was relief. No more awkward silences at the breakfast table. No more weekends spent indulging her love of old films and homemade popcorn. No more trying to explain to her why appearances mattered. Tonight, everything would be restored. Tonight was the Starlight Charity Gala, the event that drew old money, political power, media royalty, and the sort of corporate bloodlines that treated the rest of the country like employees. Tonight, he would publicly unveil the merger between Hayes Industries and the Sterling Group, sealing his place at the top of a new financial empire. In the Plaza penthouse, Beatrice adjusted his bow tie with a mother's pride and a dictator's satisfaction. "You look exactly as you should," she murmured. "Powerful, elegant, finally free of that embarrassment." "Is Tiffany downstairs?" Preston asked, studying himself in the mirror. "Waiting in the lobby in custom Versace," Beatrice replied. Now there is a woman who understands what image means. She poured herself champagne and smiled over the rim of the glass. I haven't heard a word from the little waitress since she left. I assume she's back in some forgotten town, living the life she was always meant for. A small, unwelcome twinge crossed Preston's chest. She's tougher than you think. She's irrelevant, Beatrice corrected. And after tonight, so is every trace of that mistake. The gala was being held inside a private hangar at JFK that had been transformed into something out of a billionaire's fantasy. Velvet drapery, crystal chandeliers suspended from steel beams, a champagne river flowing beneath aviation-themed installations, and the city's most powerful names gathered beneath one gleaming roof. Cameras exploded the second Preston arrived with Tiffany on his arm. Mr. Hayes, is the merger announcement tonight? You'll hear it with everyone else, he answered smoothly. But inside, something felt off. Conversations kept breaking mid-sentence. Heads kept turning toward the rear of the hangar. A current of whispers rippled through the guests, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Near the bar, Preston caught fragments. The list was amended. By whom? The Blackwood Corporation. He went still. Tiffany looked up. What's wrong? Nothing. But his face had gone pale. Beatrice dismissed it with a laugh. Nonsense. The Blackwoods don't attend events like this. They haven't shown their faces in New York in decades. Then the orchestra stopped. The velvet curtains at the far end of the hangar began to part. Behind them, the giant hangar doors rolled open, revealing the wet black tarmac under floodlights. Wind rushed in, and over it came the low, commanding whine of a jet engine winding down. A matte black Gulfstream sat just beyond the red carpet, sleek and predatory against the rain-polished concrete. On its tail, painted in restrained gold, was a crest every serious player in global finance recognized instantly. A roaring lion holding a chess piece. The Blackwood crest. A collective gasp moved through the room. The stairs extended from the aircraft. Two security men descended first, followed by an older gentleman with silver hair, a cane, and the unmistakable bearing of a man who had never once entered a room asking permission to be respected. Arthur Blackwood. And then he turned, lifting his hand toward the doorway behind him. A woman emerged into the light. She wore midnight blue velvet cut to perfection, with diamonds at her throat and ears that caught the floodlights like captured stars. Her dark hair, once always pinned up modestly at Preston's preference, fell in rich waves over her shoulders. She descended with flawless poise, every step measured, regal, devastating. When the light touched her face, Preston's champagne slipped from his fingers and shattered at his feet. Tiffany gasped. Beatrice stopped breathing. It was Vivian. And yet, it was not. The woman stepping onto that red carpet looked nothing like the discarded wife they had expelled into the rain. She did not look hurt. She did not look humbled. She looked sharpened, transformed, elevated into something untouchable. Her gaze found Preston instantly and passed over him with the cool acknowledgement one gave to something insignificant. Arthur tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. "Shall we, Sienna?" he asked. "Yes, grandfather," she replied, her voice calm, deep, and commanding enough to carry through the stunned silence. "Let's go say hello to my ex-husband." The crowd parted before them without being asked. Men who owned private islands stepped aside. Women who had built dynasties lowered their voices. The Blackwoods were not simply rich. They were legacy. They were quiet power old enough to feel mythic. Sienna, stopped in front of Preston, Beatrice, and Tiffany. The three of them looked as though the floor had dropped away beneath them. "Vivian," Preston said, his voice breaking. "What is this? What's happening? How do you know Arthur Blackwood?" She held his gaze. "I don't know him, Preston. I belong to him. I'm Sienna Vivian Blackwood." Beatrice let out a sharp, ugly sound. "Impossible. This is some performance. She's a fraud. She's a waitress from Oregon who barely knew which fork to use at dinner." Arthur Blackwood didn't even look at Beatrice when he spoke. "If that woman points at my granddaughter again," he said to the security detail, "break her finger." The guards stepped forward at once. Beatrice recoiled. Tiffany stared at Vivian, horrified. The Blackwood heiress disappeared 6 years ago. People said she vanished after some kind of breakdown. "I didn't vanish because I broke," Sienna said evenly. "I left because I was sick of being valued for my surname and my inheritance. I wanted to know if it was possible to be loved without either. So I walked away from Billions. I changed my name. I waited tables. I lived alone. And when I met Preston, I thought maybe I had found something real." Her eyes moved back to her ex-husband, and for the first time there was pain there. Quiet, old, and devastating. "I thought you loved me because I was me. Not because of what I could do for your image. Not because I looked weak enough to rescue." Preston stepped toward her instinctively. "I did love you. I still do." "No." Her raised hand stopped him in place. "You loved being needed. You loved believing you had chosen someone beneath you. Someone grateful enough to stay small. The moment I became inconvenient for your mother, the moment I no longer fit the social script she wrote for your life, you let me be humiliated." Her voice did not rise, but the room leaned closer. "I offered you a quiet divorce. I asked for nothing. You could have let me disappear with my dignity intact. Instead, you cheated on me in our bed, let your mother treat me like filth, and pushed me out as though I had stolen something from your family instead of giving 5 years of my life to it." Beatrice straightened, trying to reclaim control through pure nerve. "So what if you were born rich? We still win tonight. Preston is merging with the Sterling Group. By the end of this evening, we'll be stronger than ever. You can arrive in whatever jet you like, darling, but that doesn't change the board." At that, Sienna smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had already seen 10 moves ahead. "The Sterling Group," she said, turning her gaze toward Tiffany. "That would be your father's company." Tiffany lifted her chin. "And he crushes anyone who gets in our way. Interesting." Sienna extended her hand, and Arthur passed her a black leather portfolio. She opened it with deliberate calm. "When I signed those divorce papers 2 weeks ago," she said, "I went back to work. The very first thing I did was investigate Sterling Group's financial position." Tiffany's confidence flickered. "Your father's company is drowning," Sienna continued. "He leveraged himself almost beyond repair, trying to expand into Asian markets that imploded last quarter. He needs this merger because Hayes Industries' reserves are the only thing standing between him and collapse." "That's a lie," Tiffany said sharply. Sienna did not spare her a glance. The loans behind Sterling's expansion were held by Zurich Commercial Bank, a respectable institution, one the Blackwood Corporation acquired 3 days ago.
The silence that followed was no longer shock. It was fear. "That means," Sienna said, closing the file, "I own the debt. I own the paper behind Sterling's future. And this morning, I called the loans." Preston stared at her. "You what?" "The merger you came here to celebrate is dead," she said. "You are about to tie yourself to a sinking corpse." Tiffany's face drained of color as she fumbled for her phone. Beatrice's pearls trembled against her throat. The room began to erupt in whispers and frantic movement. Reporters shouted questions. Guests looked for exits. Cameras rose like weapons. Arthur's voice sliced through it all. "Mr. Hayes!"
I suggest we continue this in private, unless you'd prefer your company's value to collapse before international markets open. 10 minutes later, the principal player sat in the glass-walled VIP lounge overlooking the tarmac. Down below, the gala was disintegrating. Up here, the air felt even tighter. On one side sat Preston, stunned and colorless, Beatrice pacing with rage and disbelief, and Tiffany trying not to sob. On the other sat Arthur Blackwood, serene as winter, and Sienna, composed with a glass of sparkling water in hand, as though she were attending a perfectly ordinary meeting. "You can't legally do this," Beatrice snapped. "You can't just call dead in overnight. There are procedures." "There were," Sienna corrected, "until Mr. Sterling violated a covenant requirement last month. A small thing, but enough. My legal team is extraordinarily thorough." Beatrice faltered. "What do you want?" Preston asked at last. He looked hollow now, stripped of certainty, and for one fleeting second, he resembled the young man she had once laughed with in a diner booth. "Is this revenge? Do you want money?" "Revenge is messy," Sienna said. "This is cleaner." She rose and walked to the window, looking down at the Blackwood jet. "I could destroy the Sterlings by morning," she said. "And because you guaranteed part of their exposure before the merger closed, Hayes Industries would take the hit with them. My analysts found the filings. You signed them last week." Preston closed his eyes. "Mother insisted." "Of course she did." He looked at her helplessly. "So that's it? You ruin us?" Sienna turned back. "No, because unlike you, I don't need to annihilate someone to prove I have power." She returned to the table and placed both hands lightly on the glass. "I have a proposal." The room stilled. "I will convert Sterling's debt into equity. Blackwood Corporation takes controlling interest. The Sterling family keeps their homes, but loses operational control. Their company survives, but it no longer belongs to them." Tiffany let out a broken sob. "And Hayes Industries?" Preston asked. Sienna's eyes settled on him. "That depends on a game." Beatrice stared. "A game?" "Chess," Sienna said. For a moment, no one spoke. "If you win," she continued, "I release the debt guarantee attached to Hayes Industries. Your company walks away intact. I disappear from New York, and you keep your title." "And if you win?" Preston asked. "If I win, you resign as CEO. The board seat goes to the person I name, and Beatrice vacates the family estate and relocates to a retirement community of my choosing." Beatrice exploded. "I will do no such thing!" "It's an excellent community," Sienna said mildly. "In Florida." Arthur reached into his pocket and produced a compact chess set of obsidian and ivory, placing it on the glass table with exquisite calm. "Well, Mr. Hayes," he said, Would you like to trust the lawyers to dismantle what remains of your legacy? Or would you prefer the board? Preston looked at the chess set. He had captained Yale's chess club. He had always thought himself superior to Vivian in every room, on every subject, in every game. Even during the rainy Sundays when they played at home, he assumed her losses proved the obvious. He did not understand until that moment how little he had ever truly known her. "I accept," he said. Sienna sat across from him like a queen taking her throne. "White moves first," she said. "Go ahead, Preston." He opened with King's Pawn to E4. Confident, classic, controlling. The move of a man accustomed to leading. Without hesitation, she answered with the Sicilian. He smirked. "Aggressive? You used to play defensively." "I don't anymore." The opening developed quickly. Ivory clicked against obsidian. Nobody in the room moved. Nobody breathed loudly enough to distract the tension. Beatrice hovered behind Preston, fingers clamped on the back of his chair. Arthur sat to the side with the measured stillness of a man watching a long-expected truth unfold. By move 10, Preston felt better. He had control of the center. His pieces were active, his king was safely castled, and Sienna's structure looked irregular. She had moved her queen early, something he interpreted as impatience. A mistake. "You've overextended," he said, as he developed his bishop. "You always forget the diagonals." "Do I?" Instead of retreating or repairing the pressure he had built, she pushed a pawn on the far side of the board, a seemingly irrelevant move. Beatrice leaned down. "Ignore it. Take the queen." He saw it too, an opening. He drove his knight forward, forking her queen and bishop. Brutal, efficient. He looked up, waiting for the flash of anxiety he used to enjoy seeing when she was forced onto the defensive. Instead, Sienna gave him a small, almost sorrowful smile. "Do you remember our 3rd anniversary?" she asked. His brow furrowed. "What?" "The French restaurant in the city. Your mother's favorite." She moved her queen deeper into danger, to a square that seemed irrational. "What does that have to do with this?" "You spent the entire dinner answering emails about the Dover acquisition. You didn't say one meaningful sentence to me until dessert arrived." "I was building a future for us." "No," she said, and with a swift motion took his bishop. "You were building a future for yourself. I was just part of the furniture." He saw the trap. Her queen was exposed now. If he took it, he'd gain decisive material. If he didn't, she'd keep slicing his position open. He captured the queen. Relief rushed through him. "There, it's over. You can't win without your queen." Behind him, Beatrice laughed sharply. "Exactly. She overplayed her hand, just like always." But Sienna did not look at the captured piece. She looked only at Preston. "That's always been your problem," she said. "You mistake titles for power. You think if the queen falls, the war ends. You've never respected the people who actually keep the board alive." Then she touched the pawn she had advanced earlier. The pawn began to move. At first it seemed irritating, not threatening. He shifted his knight. She advanced it again. He brought a rook across. She cleared a path. He repositioned his bishop. She sacrificed a knight. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "You're throwing pieces away." "I'm making room." Slowly, agonizingly, the shape of the game changed. Preston still had more material, but his pieces no longer worked together. He had stronger pieces and no plan. Sienna had fewer pieces, but they were coordinated, patient, precise. That single pawn kept marching forward like fate. "Don't let it promote," Beatrice whispered harshly. "Stop that pawn." He tried. He gave up a bishop to contain it. He moved his king to cut its path. He angled his rook for a block. But every attempt opened another weakness, and Sienna exploited each one with calm brutality. A bishop he had forgotten cut across the board. A rook pinned his defense. A check forced his king one square to the left. Another drove it toward the edge. As she played, she spoke in the same quiet tone, and somehow that made every word sharper. "In 5 years, you never once asked about the family I came from. You knew I was alone, and you never asked why. You didn't want to know. You preferred the story where I had nothing." His jaw tightened. "I didn't care where you came from." "You cared very much," she said. "You liked believing I came from nowhere. It made you feel important, necessary, generous. But the truth frightened you long before you ever heard it." She moved her rook. Check. His king had one legal move. He took it. She advanced the pawn again. Now it stood on the 7th rank, one square away from becoming something else. Preston looked at the board, then at his queen stranded far from the real battle, then at his pinned rook, his trapped king, his pieces obstructing one another like executives in a collapsing company. Sweat formed at his temples. For the first time all night, he understood the shape of his own arrogance. "Don't," he said. Sienna reached forward and pushed the pawn to the final square. "Promotion." Arthur handed her a queen from the captured pieces. She placed it down with elegant finality. "Checkmate." No one moved. Preston stared at the board as if the pattern might shift if he looked hard enough. But there was no escape. The king had nowhere left to go. He had been defeated not by the most powerful piece, but by the one he had dismissed 10 moves earlier. Exactly as he had dismissed her. He leaned back slowly, hollowed out from the inside. "I lost," he said. "Yes," Sienna replied, rising from her chair. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. "You did." Beatrice's voice cracked into the silence. "No, that doesn't count. She manipulated him. She distracted him." Arthur rose as well, cane striking the floor with quiet force. "The game was fair. Your son accepted the terms, and the Blackwoods collect." The door opened. 2 attorneys entered carrying briefcases embossed with the insignia of one of the world's most formidable law firms. They laid documents across the table, over the chessboard, over the site of Preston's humiliation. "Sign," Sienna said, looking down at him. "The way I signed. Quietly." And he did. The resignation was surgical in its speed. Preston Hayes stepped down as CEO of Hayes Industries before the markets even opened. He kept his shares, but not his power. His voting rights were frozen inside a blind trust under Blackwood control. He would remain wealthy, but wealth without influence was something he had never imagined having to endure. Then came Beatrice. "As for the residential matter," the lead attorney said, turning a page, "the Hayes estate has been moved as collateral under the restructuring trust." Beatrice lurched to her feet. "That house is mine."
Actually, said the attorney calmly, it belonged to your late husband, passed to your son, and has now been transferred as part of the governing arrangement. You can't possibly mean to remove me from my own home. We can, Sienna said. And we are. You have 48 hours. Beatrice's face contorted. You can't send me away. I can. And you'll be comfortable. The community in Boca Raton is lovely. Sun, ocean air, bridge club. I'm sure you'll have plenty to say. Preston didn't defend her. He looked broken now in a way he had not when the game ended. Because here, at last, the bill had come due for the years he had let his mother shape his cowardice into character. Do something, Beatrice hissed at him. This is your fault if you let it happen.
He slowly pulled her hand off his arm. No, he said. It's yours. And mine. I just finally see the difference. That was the moment Beatrice truly collapsed. Sienna turned to the lawyers. And the new CEO? The door opened again. A man entered in an off-the-rack suit, shoulders straight, expression composed, intelligence clear behind wire-rim glasses. Lucas Mercer. Preston looked as if he had seen the dead walk in. 3 years earlier, Lucas had been the brightest engineering mind in Hayes Industries, a man who cared about product integrity and worker safety more than quarterly optics. Preston had fired him for refusing to compromise test standards on a set of engine prototypes. Hello, Preston, Lucas said without triumph. Sienna addressed the room. Lucas Mercer is the new CEO of Hayes Industries, full operational authority. He answers to the Blackwood board and to me. He's an engineer, Preston said weakly. Exactly, Sienna answered. That's why the company has a chance. Lucas placed a folder on the table. I've reviewed the merger documents. Sterling's toxic exposure gets cut away. The aviation division stays intact. We can preserve the workforce and rebuild from the core. Good, Sienna said. Then start. She turned away from the ruins behind her. Not because she was merciful, because she was finished. Arthur offered his arm. Are we done here, Sienna? She looked once at the chessboard, once at the signatures, once at the man who had mistaken her gentleness for weakness. Yes, she said. We're done. By the time they returned to the main hangar, the glamour had curdled into panic. Guests were leaving quickly, not wanting to be photographed near the wreckage. Reporters remained, hungry and electrified. Camera flashes lit the tarmac in harsh bursts as Sienna and Arthur made their way toward the waiting jet. A Wall Street Journal reporter called out, "Ms. Blackwood, is it true you spent years working as a waitress under a false name?" Sienna paused at the foot of the stairs. Wind tugged at her hair. The night air smelled of rain, fuel, and possibility. It's true, she said clearly. And if tonight proves anything, it's this. Never underestimate the person serving your coffee. One day, they may be the one deciding your future. She turned to board the aircraft. In the VIP window above, Preston stood motionless, staring down at her. But from where she stood now, he looked exactly like what he had become. Small. Arthur touched her shoulder. Are you all right? She took in one long breath and felt the answer settle into her bones. Yes, she said. For the first time in years, I am. He smiled faintly. You played beautifully. Your father would have been proud. She swallowed against the sudden sting in her chest. I know. She climbed the final steps. Then headlights cut across the tarmac. A black town car tore past security, braked hard near the jet, and came to a stop. A man stepped out in a tuxedo worn with careless authority, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, his expression all sharp edges and dangerous amusement. Gabriel Stone. Even Arthur stiffened. Gabriel Stone was known in the financial world as the Undertaker, a corporate raider who specialized in buying dying companies and stripping them for value before anyone else saw the corpse was still warm. He was ruthless, brilliant, and allegedly incapable of human tenderness. He was also the only person Sienna had ever played to a draw in chess. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at her. "Going somewhere, Sienna?" Arthur's voice dropped. "Stone, what do you want?" Gabriel ignored him. His eyes stayed on Sienna. "I heard you came back from the dead. I also heard you consumed Preston Hayes in one evening. Impressive." "I'm busy," Sienna said coolly, "and I have a flight to catch." "To Zurich," he said. "To close Sterling." Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe." "You'll want to delay that." He reached inside his jacket. Blackwood security tensed immediately, but Gabriel only drew out a black card between two fingers and flicked it onto the stair below her. "Sterling's books are dirtier than you think. There are liabilities buried in the Cayman structure. If you close the deal as it stands, you inherit a bomb." "How do you know?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only challenge. "Because I was planning to buy them myself next week." He turned back toward his car. "Call me," he said over his shoulder. "Unless you enjoy billion-dollar mistakes." Then he left. Sienna bent, picked up the card, and looked at the gold lettering. Just a name, a number, nothing else. Arthur frowned. "He's dangerous." She slipped the card into the bodice of her dress. "So am I." 3 days later, Zurich wore a face of polished ice and old money. The headquarters of Blackwood Corporation rose over the banking district in glass and steel, reflecting a city built on secrecy, precision, and power. From the corner office, Sienna could see the Alps in the distance, white and severe against the gray sky. Arthur sat by the fire, one leg crossed over the other, watching her from behind half-moon glasses. That morning, he had formally stepped down as chairman and named her his successor. The board had voted unanimously. In truth, fear and admiration often produced the same result. Sienna sat at her desk, surrounded by acquisition files, debt maps, audit reports, and international legal opinions. Yet her attention remained fixed on one specific document. "You've been staring at that page for nearly an hour," Arthur said. She did not answer immediately. Then she slid the file across to him. Gabriel was right. Arthur's expression darkened as he scanned the contents. A Cayman shell entity. Cross-collateralized intellectual property. Shadow banking exposure routed through a sanctioned Russian nexus. By the time he looked up, even he had gone pale. "My God," he said. "If we'd closed under the original structure, EU regulators could have frozen Blackwood assets across multiple jurisdictions. It would have poisoned the entire deal." Arthur closed the file slowly. "Stone saved us. Or positioned himself," Sienna said. "With men like him, the difference is mostly academic." She lifted the black card from her desk and turned it between her fingers. Arthur watched her carefully. "You intend to call him?" "I intend," she said. to find out why a man like Gabriel Stone warned me instead of profiting from my mistake. She dialed. He answered on the second ring, as though he had been expecting her. I wondered how long it would take you to find the Russian connection, he said. No greeting? Sienna replied. No polite concern? Straight to the trapdoor? You don't strike me as a woman who enjoys wasted time. She allowed herself the smallest smile. Your information was accurate. I've restructured the acquisition. The toxic liabilities are carved out. Clean close in an hour. Good, he said. Most people would have signed first and panicked later. I'm not most people. No, Gabriel said. You really aren't. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, not empty, but charged. The kind of silence that belonged to people who recognized something dangerous in each other and didn't flinch. So, she said, what do you want in return? Dinner. Sienna blinked. That's your price? Paris. Next Saturday. New place in the first. Let's see whether you handle a wine list as well as you handle corporate warfare. She stood and moved toward the window, looking over Zurich's clean white rooftops. Somewhere far behind her, in another life, was the woman who had cried alone in a bathroom because her husband forgot her birthday. Somewhere behind her was the version of herself that accepted scraps and called it love. That woman was gone. I prefer Italian, she said. A beat. Rome, then, Gabriel answered, voice deepening with unmistakable satisfaction. Friday night. I'll send the jet. She looked at the Blackwood crest reflected in the glass. Don't bother, she said softly. I have my own. She ended the call and stood there for a moment, watching her reflection in the window. Stronger now, sharper, unafraid. They had thought signing away her marriage would erase her. They had believed humiliation would make her small. They had stripped her of a home, a surname, and a place at their table, never imagining they were only clearing the path back to her throne. The silence of that divorce had been mistaken for defeat. In truth, it was only the pause before the roar.